Okay, so hi. Our talk today is going to be about abortion. Of all of the different subjects that we talk about in biomedical ethics, it seems that this is one of the topics that brings out the most passion in people. When we go through the abortion statistics, what we're going to learn is that 1 in 4 women in this country have had an abortion. So I kind of like to put that statistic out because I want you to look around in this classroom, and I want you to realize that as we go into this topic, that there probably is more than one person sitting in this room who has had to undergo an abortion. So I'd like to put that right out in the beginning to make sure that everybody understands that this is a subject that is very passionate, very sensitive, and that when we go through it, we need to do that with the knowledge that, these are people's lives that we're talking about. All right, so, at the base of this lecture is, when does life begin? We're going to talk about religious beliefs and how the different religions view abortion. And we're going to go through some pro-life arguments and some pro-choice arguments. We're going to look at it from a legal standpoint and from a medical standpoint. So just to start with the statistics, 2008, 1.21 million abortions took place in the United States. Nearly 50 million legal abortions have occurred in the United States. When you look at statistics, you have to make sure that you get your statistics from a reputable source. So these statistics that I'm going to share are from the Guttmacher Institute, and that is federally funded. It's through the Centers for Disease Control. So looking at statistics for abortion, California, Maryland, and New Hampshire don't provide any statistics. So that's telling us that that our statistics are going to be a little bit skewed because it's not really recording from all of the different states. California, who accounts for far more abortions than any other state, their totals are routinely incomplete. But having said that, let's go through the statistics. So if you look at the abortion rates based by state to state, they range from a low of 58 abortions per 1,000 live births to a high of 737 abortions per 1,000 live births. So that's a huge difference in number, and it is based on states. Nearly 50% of pregnancies among American women are unintended, and 4 in 10 of these pregnancies are terminated by abortion. Many people have this view of this young girl who is going out and just having, unprotected sex again and again and going and having abortions. But when you look at the statistics, what you find is that that's not really true. 22% of all U.S. pregnancies end in abortion. I also want to make a stipulation here that any time a baby is lost during the term of the pregnancy, it does fall under an abortion. So there are women who did not elect to have the abortion but had spontaneously lost the fetus, and that does get categorized under abortion. It's interesting to look at the countries that allow abortion versus the ones that don't. And I generally like to say, can you look at this comparison of illegal to legal? And is there any characteristics of the countries that you see, the ones that will allow for legal abortion and the ones that don't? I'll give you a second to think about that. And I get a lot of different answers from the class, but generally in the end, the ones in which abortion is illegal tend to be very Catholic-based, very Christian-based, because the Catholic Church is the #1 opponent to abortions. So when you have countries that are very solidly Christian, in particular Catholic, you find that there is more resistance. So the profile of a woman that's had an abortion is increasingly those who were never married, those who are low income, non-white and Hispanic, and those who already have one child. So who is it that's having the abortions? 84% of all abortions were performed on unmarried women. So it's not the married women who are choosing to have the abortion, it's unmarried women. When you break it down age by age, 20 to 24% have obtained 33% of all abortions come from women in that age range. 24% in the age range of 25 to 29. 50% of all U.S. women obtaining abortions are under the age of 25. And the next one is interesting. If you're under the age of 15, there's not a lot of women under the age of 15. Only 0.05% of all abortions are in that age range. However, people or children under the age of 15, 768 out of 1,000 in that age range will choose to have an abortion. And then I usually say, do we know who this particular person is. All right, so black women are 4.8, almost 5 times more likely than non-Hispanic white women to have abortions, and Hispanic women about 2.7 times more likely. Now, when you break it down based on ethnicity, you have to be careful because there's a lot more factors that play into this than just the ethnicity. A lot of this is related to income. And so there are correlations between ethnic groups and income levels that may also play into this. 37% of women attaining abortions identify themselves as Protestant, 28% as Catholic. At this rate, nearly 1/3 of all American women will have an abortion, which is a pretty staggering statistic. 47% of women who have abortions had at least one previous abortion. This statistic is the one that really kind of sits hard with people because some people will think, it's okay if you make a mistake and you have an abortion. But the fact that 50% are coming back and having an additional abortion, some people find that a little alarming. So why do people have abortions? Why do women choose to have abortions? 33 out of 4 say that a baby would interfere with work, school, and other responsibilities. When you look at that, you kind of go, well, it's going to interfere with school, so I can't do it. But you have to understand that for many women, school and work means survival. So, 3/4 are saying, I'm choosing to have this abortion because it is going to impact on my ability to survive. 3/4 say they can't afford a child. Half say they don't want to be a single parent or are having problems with their husband or partner. Some more statistics, I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but the two most common reasons women gave for abortions is because having a baby would dramatically change my life, 74%, and 73%, I can't afford a baby right now. It was thought at one time that the men were forcing the women to have abortions, but we've kind of come to the conclusion that that's not necessarily the truth when you look at the statistics. Only 14% indicate that their husband or partner wants them to have the abortion as the reason. That's down from 24% in previous surveys. 88% of all abortions happen in the first trimester. Abortion at 8 weeks or less is 7 times safer than childbirth, and abortion is very common. Now, before I continue, I kind of want to say a disclaimer. I'm not going to make it known whether I am pro-life or pro-choice. I tend to argue more on the pro-choice side of things because we're going to watch a video, and in that video there is a portion of the afterbirth after an abortion, and that picture speaks 1,000 words. So I do tend to argue more on the pro-choice side, only because in that video and when we watch it, it speaks its own it speaks with its own voice. I find these statistics very interesting because a lot of people say, well, you should be using your birth control. You got pregnant because you were not using proper birth control. But in fact, only 8% of women who choose to have an abortion have never used a method of birth control. So that means 92% of them have used birth control. 9 in 10 women at risk of unintended pregnancy are using a contraceptive method at the time they become pregnant. 54% having abortions used a contraceptive method during the month that they became pregnant. 76% of pill users and 49% of condom users said, yes, we were doing it, but maybe we weren't as consistent as we should be. So that kind of shows you that even though you are using your contraceptive methods and you're doing everything you can to prevent pregnancy, there's a large percentage of women that are getting pregnant in spite of that. The laws are changing. After Roe versus Wade, there was a lot of freedom in the states to allow women to have abortions. But over time, very steadily, we've been picking away at those rights. 2015, states enacted 57 new abortion restrictions. And it's an ongoing picking away at the woman's legal ability to have an abortion. So at the heart of this is, when does life begin? And is it ever okay to kill a human being? And when I started into this topic and I looked at it from a religious viewpoint, my thought was that every religion was going to agree on when life begins. The Catholic Church believes that life begins at conception. When the sperm and egg are united, They believe that that is the point that life begins. But as I went through all of the different religions, what I learned was in the Jewish religion, they do not believe that life begins until birth. So we have rules and laws now coming into play that says that a woman does not have the right to have an abortion because it is killing life, when in fact, not all people, there is no scientific evidence exactly when life begins. And it is from this strong Catholic belief that life begins at conception. So I ask you, when does life begin? So when does life begin? So when you ask that poll, international polls, 22.7% of voters selected fertilization at the point where life begins. So that's less than a quarter of people who actually do believe that the moment of conception is when life begins. About a quarter of the people, 23.5, believe that life begins at the detection of the fetal heartbeat. Implantation of the embryo in the womb, that is about 15%. Some believe that life begins at birth. And still others believe that life begins at the point of sentence. That is when the higher perceptions, the higher brain functions come into play. So we're going to go through all of these different steps, and I'm going to ask you to make your own decision on when you believe that life begins. So what makes something alive? The characteristics of living things are movement, respiration, sense, growth, reproduction, energy, and nutrition. So about 1 day before conception, when the woman ovulates, the mature ovum travels down the fallopian tubes. Some people believe that the egg itself is a form of human life, but it doesn't have the ability to reproduce itself. If a woman has not ovulated and she has unprotected intercourse and she wants to avoid a pregnancy, she can take the morning after pill. So taking a morning after pill at this point will prevent fertilization of the egg and prevent implantation. But this becomes pretty key down the road with the morning after pill. So some people believe that the moment of conception, or that instant of conception, is the point that life begins. Does it fit our criteria? Well, the zygote is biologically active. It fulfills 4 of the criteria: life, metabolism, growth, reaction to stimuli, and reproduction. Rarely it can reproduce itself through twinning, and that can happen anytime up to about 14 days. The next one is implantation. So 9 or 10 days after conception, the blastocyst can attach itself into the endometrium. Some medical dictionaries will state this as the start of the pregnancy, and that is about 10 days after conception. So here we have the egg that has been fertilized, and it's getting ready to embed itself in the endometrium. Now this is very key when you talk about the morning after pill, because actually the morning after pill has the ability to prevent an already fertilized egg from embedding in the endometrium. So if you believe that life begins at conception, then at that point that is already considered a child. So taking the morning after pill would equal having an abortion, because you are in fact killing life if you believe that life begins at conception. And that's just kind of showing you the cycle and how the morning after pill works. Many religions believe that God implants a soul in the zygote during conception. And, the soul, we've talked about religion, we've talked about those that believe in God and those that don't. So the soul is kind of an undefinable entity that plays into discussion whenever religion plays a part in your moral decisions. So 12 days after conception, the blastocyst starts to produce hormones we can detect in the woman's urine. And this is the point that many pro-choice groups will say is the start of the pregnancy. And at this point, home pregnancy tests can determine that the woman is pregnant. At 5 weeks after conception, their tiny arm and leg buds. The hands have webs between the fingers, and the face is indistinguishable. You can see that there's a face, but it is not distinguishable as a human face. So now we're at 5 weeks after conception. At 7 weeks, pain sensors appear. They're not yet hooked up, but they are visible. So many conservative Christians believe that the embryo can feel pain at this point. That is not scientific fact. 2 months. Now the face resembles that of a primate, not fully human in appearance. The brain begins to form, but at this point, 2 months, there's no consciousness in this stage of development. The higher brain functions are not yet functioning. 10 weeks. Now we're at 2.5 months. The embryo looks like a fetus, The face does look human, and you can tell whether it's male or female via an ultrasound. So we're at 2.5 months. Most abortions take place within the first 3 months. Most abortion regulations state that abortion, the cutoff is at 3 months. And I would like to tell you that late-term abortions do not happen. But in fact, it's pretty easy, even in the state of New Jersey, for a woman to get a late-term abortion. All she has to do is prove that the pregnancy will cause some type of mental anguish, and it is easier than I would like for those late-term abortions to happen. When we go into the video and when we watch that, that is a late-term abortion. So when you see the doctors picking through the baby parts, understand that that is a late-term abortion. So at 22 weeks or 5 months, the baby weighs about 1 pound. There's hair on the head and movement can be felt. And again, elective abortions are usually not available at this stage. I would like to say that they don't happen, but they happen more often than you would think. Medical associations generally outlaw almost all abortions beyond 20 to 21 weeks of gestation. So at 22 weeks, the baby has about a 15% chance of survival outside of the womb. Half of these are brain damaged. Neonatologists predict that no baby will ever be viable before 22 weeks because the lungs are not fully formed. However, there is some research on developing artificial wombs. So if an artificial womb does become available, then that may change. The key issue on late-term abortions is whether the fetus is viable. If the fetus outside of the womb can survive on its own, then it is given more protection under the law. So viable versus unviable fetuses. Viable means it's reached a stage of development that it's capable of living in normal circumstances outside the uterus. Non-viable means that it's not capable of living, growing, or developing and functioning successfully. So a non-viable fetus often has no legal rights. So now we're at 6 months. The baby weighs about 2 pounds. Now the brain neurons begin to link up and higher functions of the fetal brain turns on, so the child becomes sentient. Many people believe that this is the time when a fetus becomes a person because they are now able to perceive and feel, and the higher pathways of the brain are now functioning. So sentience is the ability to feel or perceive. That generally occurs around the 26th week of pregnancy. Some religions believe that the soul can't exist until the fetus becomes sentient. So if you believe in a soul, then it is believed by many religions that this is the point where the soul comes into the body. But others don't believe that there is a soul. So is it ever okay to kill? So we talked about this, and we said, yes, we do believe, even though it's one of the 10 commandments that thou shalt not kill, we do believe in our culture that there are certain circumstances where it is okay to kill, and we talked about them before. It's okay, we believe that it's okay if your life is in danger to kill. We believe that it's okay if a child's life is in danger to protect ourselves. We believe that it's okay to kill in war. And we believe that it's okay to kill with capital punishment. So even though that is a universal law, thou shalt not kill, there are certain circumstances in our culture where we do believe that it is okay to kill. All right, so religious beliefs. Religious beliefs, like I said, when I went in and I did the research on this, I was kind of surprised because I just automatically assumed I was raised Catholic, I was raised in Christianity. So I just automatically assumed that all of the religions would agree on when life begins. So the Catholic Church strongly opposes abortion. Virtually every other branch of Christianity opposes elective abortion as a means of birth control, but will support it to some extent, particularly if the mother's life is in danger. Judaism will agree to abortion in order to protect the mother's life or the mother's health. The Talmud states that a fetus is not legally a person until birth. Hinduism condemns elective abortions, but will generally support abortions to save the mother's life or in cases of severe fetal development. And that's a topic that we haven't really talked about because elective abortions are done more and more often now for women that have some type of prenatal testing and are given the information that there's a high probability that the fetus might be born with some type of severe developmental defect. And many times now, these women are choosing to have an elective abortion. If you've noticed, there's not as many children around with Down syndrome. And one of the reasons is because more and more women are given that information and choosing to have an elective abortion of a child that has a high probability of being Down syndrome. So Hindu theologians believe that personhood begins at 3 months. Islam universally agree that an abortion is required if the mother's life is at risk, because they view women as the original source of life and the fetus as potential life. Most Islamic scholars agree that the fetus becomes a living soul at about 4 months or 120 days. Buddhist, there's not really a single answer for the Buddhist view. The Dalai Lama was quoted as saying, "I think an abortion should be approved or disapproved according to each circumstance." So pro-life arguments. Any action which destroys an embryo or a fetus kills a person. So the pro-life is promoting life, and they believe that killing the fetus at any point after conception is indeed killing a human being. And I kind of like this on the right-hand side. That makes me chuckle. If you cut off my reproductive choices, then I'll cut off yours. Just a little. So the pro-life arguments. Since life begins at conception, then having an abortion is considered murder. And no civilized society will permit one human to intentionally kill another, and that there are other viable opportunities for women, such as adoption. If you have an abortion, it is pro-life will state that you increase the probability of having medical complications later in life, a higher risk of ectopic pregnancies, it increases the chances of miscarriage, and that abortion should not be used as a contraception. And many of the pro-life proponents say that women should not be having unprotected sex, or should not be having sex at all, but should wait until marriage to have sex. And it's kind of interesting that if you are an American that opposes abortion, tax dollars can be used to help to pay for women who are having abortions. So that's kind of an interesting twist. And those who choose to have abortions are often minors, and do they have enough life experience to make that decision? And that abortions frequently cause intense psychological pain and stress down the road. Pro-choice arguments are going to kind of take the same points, but they're going to argue them from the other side. So nearly 88% of all abortions take place in the first trimester when the fetus is not viable. So therefore it is not given protection under the law, and it is not considered a human being. The concept of personhood is different than the concept of human life. They believe that adoption is not an alternative because most women that carry the child to birth do not then opt to give it up for adoption. Most abortions take place in the first trimester, and if it's done in a reputable institute, then medical abortions have less than a 0.5% risk of serious complications and do not affect the woman's health or the future ability to become pregnant. In cases of incest or rape, forcing a woman who was made pregnant by this act can cause further psychological harm. Abortion is not used as a form of contraception. Pregnancy can occur even with responsible contraceptive use. Only 8% of the women who have become pregnant and chosen abortion did not use any form of birth control. And it is critical to a woman's rights to have this control over her body, because more and more we are moving towards being able to tell women what they should be able to do with their bodies because they are pregnant. A couple terms we just need to go through. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but spontaneous abortions would be a miscarriage. Induced abortions would be one where the abortion is caused by a medical procedure or intentionally administering drugs. And with induced abortions, they can either be therapeutic. The woman chose to do this medical procedure because the child was diagnosed with Down syndrome, or non-therapeutic for whatever reason she wants. So therapeutic abortions perform to save the life of the pregnant woman. Non-therapeutic abortions, it's an elective or voluntary abortion performed for non-medical reasons. Maternal fetal conflict is the medical treatment for the fetus that is not beneficiary to the mother. So I spoke earlier about the fact that more and more we are moving into a place where we believe that it is okay to tell a woman what she can and cannot do with her body. And most of us would agree that we would like to protect an unborn child. But it is not justice in that women are allowed to be told and held responsible for what to do. That population, pregnant women alone, are given a list of rules that the general population does not have to follow. So once you open the door to allow a type of behavior, you open the door to other abuses. How many of you, if you walk by a pregnant woman who is smoking a cigarette, how many of you are going to give her the stink eye because she shouldn't be smoking a cigarette? And how many of you feel justified in giving her the stink eye? I had a student who worked in a bar and refused to serve a woman who was visibly pregnant. And how does society view that? So do you think that a woman who takes cocaine, do you think that it's okay to tell a woman that she shouldn't take cocaine while she's pregnant? And by far, the majority of students will say, yes, we have a right to tell a woman that she can't take cocaine while she's pregnant. But that also crosses the line, because now we have opened the door that it's okay for us to put stipulations on a pregnant woman. Many of you know that, is it safe for women to be overweight when they're pregnant? Is there scientific evidence to back the fact that overweight women has an adverse effect on the fetus? In fact, yes, there is scientific evidence. So now that we've opened the door that it's okay for society to impose stipulations on pregnant women, could they tell me if I was pregnant and I was overweight that I can't drink that soda or I can't eat that candy bar? Because once we have opened the door that it's okay to put these stipulations on, who gets to say where the line is drawn? So U.S. courts have ruled that a child does have a legal right to begin life with sound and body. So basically, legally, we have now set the precedence that society is allowed to step in and tell a woman what she can and cannot do with her body, a pregnant woman, based on what is best for the fetus. And U.S. courts have demonstrated a willingness to force treatment on a mother for the sake of a viable fetus. So the court orders force a pregnant woman to forfeit their autonomy in ways that's not required of any other segment of the population, competent men or non-pregnant women. So this isn't inconsistent. So it's allowing a segment of the population to be isolated and rules imposed on that population that are not imposed on any other member. So abortion procedures are usually performed by a gynecologist or a certified nurse practitioner. There's 5 different types of abortion procedures. I'm not going to go through them. I'm just going to kind of show you that there's different types that exist. Most of the procedures that are done during the 2nd and 3rd trimester are with chemicals, going through the different types, hypertonic saline solution, urea. I'm not going to go through them in detail. Partial birth abortion. That was a ban that was put in place in 2003 because one of the acceptable abortion procedures was a procedure that kind of basically cut off the baby's head. So the baby's body was expelled from the uterus, but the head was left inside. That is no longer legal to do. And that was from George W. Bush, put that law into place in 2003. Geraldine Jerry Santoro, when we watched the video Lake of Fire, you're going to see her picture come up. And she was kind of the poster child for abortion rights. This was a woman, she had 2 other children. She was a single woman, and she was found in a hotel after giving herself an illegal abortion with a coat hanger in the early 60s. So this was a picture that was very prevalent, and it was kind of saying the message is that women are going to have abortions. Women are going to have abortions. If it's illegal in the country, then women are going to have illegal abortions, and that's going to lead to a higher rate of death. In fact, prior to abortion becoming legal, the number 1 cause of death for women in childbearing years was giving themselves an illegal abortion. So about 1 in 8 pregnancy-related deaths worldwide is associated with unsafe abortions, and that's mostly in countries where it's illegal. So according to Guttmacher, 68,000 women die annually as a result of complications of unsafe abortions. And 2 to 7 million women each year survive unsafe abortions but sustain long-term damage or disease. So the final conclusion is that abortion is safe in countries where it's legal, but dangerous in countries where it's outlawed. And the other point to this is, just because abortion is outlawed does not mean that women are not going to continue to seek abortions. Different ways to give yourself an abortion. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but many times they would lead to the mother dying. Couple of court cases that we have to talk about: Griswold versus Connecticut, 1965, Roe versus Wade, and the Born Alive Infant Protection Act. So in 1965, prior to 1965, it was not acceptable for women or couples to use contraceptives in any way, shape, or form. So prior to 1965, we were not allowed to use birth control. It goes back to an 1879 law that said that any person who uses any drug, medical article, or instrument for the purpose of preventing conception shall be fined not less than $40 and can be imprisoned, and that providing somebody with any type of birth control is also an offense. So 1965, now birth control is made legal. However, it is only made legal for married couples. So 1972, the Supreme Court decision establishes the right of unmarried people to use contraceptives. Now, 1972 to most of you guys doesn't mean anything, but I was 10 years old in 1972. That's not so long ago that contraceptive was banned prior to that. And I always kind of say to you, my mother had 7 kids. I am the 6th of a family of 7 kids. And my mother did not want to have 7 kids, and my mother would not have chosen to have 7 kids. But in that time frame, women were not given that choice. You had no choice. You had to procreate. Am I glad that you didn't have that choice? Yes, I am, because as the 6th child out of 7, I would not be born. But think about the responsibility that a child brings into the life, and think about not having the right to choose whether you want to have a child or not. So Roe versus Wade, courts ruled that the fetus does not have 14th Amendment rights. They are not recognized as a person, and they are not given right to due process of law. Roe versus Wade very carefully did not answer the question of when does life begin, but it acknowledged the right of the privacy of the pregnant woman to control her own body and make the decision for her own self. It did rule that states can prohibit abortion of viable fetuses, except when abortion is necessary to save the mother's life. It established the trimester system, which gives women the absolute right to an abortion in the first 3 months of pregnancy. There is some governmental regulation in the second trimester, but it also gives rights to the states. They may restrict or ban abortions in the last trimester as the fetus nears that point of being viable. But it did not determine when life begins. So this is kind of a fun game to play. The different presidents, do you know where they were pro-life or pro-choice? So President Nixon had no opinion. Gerald Ford, no opinion. Jimmy Carter, you don't remember Jimmy Carter, but I do, and I would off the top say Jimmy Carter was definitely pro-life, but he did support a woman's right to choose. Ronald Reagan, pro-life, but he never tried to outlaw it. George W. Bush, definitely pro-life. Bill Clinton, pro-choice. George W. Bush, pro-life. Barack Obama, pro-choice. And Donald Trump, pro-life. Webster versus reproductive health. This is 1989, and this is the beginning. The Catholic Church mobilized after Roe versus Wade and went on a very active campaign to limit abortion. And in 1986, the state of Missouri enacted legislation that placed a number of restrictions on abortions. And it actually did state that life begins at conception. So public employees and facilities were not to be used in performing or assisting abortions unnecessary to save the mother's life. Encouraged women to have counseling. Encouraging a woman to have an abortion was prohibited. And physicians had to perform viability tests upon women in their 20th week or more of pregnancy. Planned Parenthood versus Casey, 1992. This is the state of Pennsylvania. And basically imposing informed consent, which we talked about. So the woman has to be told all of the possible risks involved. Spousal notification. So in the state of Pennsylvania, the woman has to give notice to their husbands. Parental consent. Children have to receive consent from their parent or guardian. Imposes a 24-hour waiting period before obtaining an abortion. And the fifth provision challenged. So Planned Parenthood versus Casey, 1992. And many believe that push now is against abortion and limiting Roe versus Wade. And there have been many courts, state by state. Each state is kind of making its own decision. So Planned Parenthood versus Casey, 1992. A woman does have a constitutional right to choose abortion before viability if her life or her health is at stake, but the court made it much more difficult for women to succeed in challenging the laws that were less than absolute prohibitions on abortion. The Born Alive Protection Act. So what was happening was that the fetus was aborted and it was born alive. But because it was an intentional abortion, the fetuses were often just left to die on their own. So the Born Alive Protection Act, 1999, is a federal law. It was introduced in 2000 and passed in 2002, and it provides legal protection for all babies that are born, whether they were aborted or not, and they do have the right to medical care. So it made it illegal to kind of put the child on the shelf and let it die. So institutional policy, institutions have the right to not offer the abortion procedure. For instance, Our Lady of Lourdes Medical Center, that is a Catholic hospital, and you cannot have an abortion at Lourdes. And there has been a significant decline in the number of hospitals and outpatient centers that are willing to perform abortions. And it has become more and more difficult to obtain one. So the debate of abortion is very heated, and the opposing views both have valid points. It's the rights of the unborn child to live versus the rights of the woman to have control over her body and her destiny. We are going to go on and we're going to watch the Lake of Fire video. It's a very graphic video. It is a very passionate video. And the students come back and you hate watching the video, but you're kind of glad. There was a lot of doctors were killed. There's a lot of passion that goes with it that many of you are not even aware of. So watch the video and learn, and then we'll pick up on the next lecture. Thank you.